In the 80s, there was a poll done in one of the newspapers. The most heinous, people in the 20th century, It was like Jack the Ripper was 1, I was 2, Charles Manson was 3. It was like, wait a second, okay? I yelled at an umpire, okay? I didn't mutilate 40 people or whatever.
Anger feels hot. Even talking about anger, my whole rib cage is warm. My legs are mobilized. It's the fight. I feel my jaw getting clenched. I want to punch somebody.
I used to be the kind of guy who I would scream on the street. I was screaming on street corners when I asked somebody the time, and they go, I would scream. I'd get in fights,
I was in a bar, and I was with my girlfriend. Across the way, there were 3 huge dudes, and they were there chilling and sort of saying things amongst themselves about her. And so, that really got to me to the point where I got up off my chair and I walked over to them, and then in a sort of methodical sort of way, sort of start picking at them. You're a fat piece of lard ass, you rich mama's boy. You're being a real Do you understand that? When I want to hurt somebody, I'm not thinking about how could they hurt me. I'm thinking about how angry I am. It just drives you.
Mary is a Los Angeles-based writer and filmmaker who knows what it's like to be in the grip of anger.
I was born in Barranquilla, Colombia, which is on the northern coast of South America. My family moved here when I was 10 years old. My father was very frustrated. He would do things like punch walls and kick doors down and things like that. He was really tense. He was really angry. And by the time that I was like 14, 15, I was really reacting. I was so angry at him that I wanted to, I almost kind of wanted to fight him to see who would win. Eventually, it sort of progressed, sort of like a general anger towards people, towards things, towards a world that didn't understand me.
You can follow through a little more too.
On the right or on the left?
Yeah, on the right.
On the right.
Yeah, especially.
Okay. When I get into arguments, get into fights, I only see that person or that thing in front of me that I want to attack. And then I'm acutely assessing the situation, but only for one purpose, and that's to win.
When animals are threatened, they experience a surge of hormones that make them ready to attack or to retreat. Human animals are no exception. Our fight or flight response is crucial for our survival.
Anger can feel exhilarating because what we do is trigger the fight or flight response. We secrete lots of adrenaline to power our large muscles in the event that we have to fight or flee from the predator. We secrete cortisol, which heightens our auditory and visual sensitivities. We stop digesting lunch because who needs to digest lunch if you're about to become lunch? Now that response is very appropriate when we're dealing with life-threatening danger. However, the yellow cab driver that cut you off in traffic comes to supplant the saber-toothed tiger that our ancestors millennia ago were dealing with. And when we look at what happens physiologically, we stay in this heightened state for quite some period of time. And because we're dealing with fight or flight, we're dealing with impulses that are very strong.
The emotions associated with fight or flight, emotions like anger and fear, are triggered deep inside our brain.
5, 4,
3, 2, 1, time!
And when we try to control them, we start a tug of war between our brain's oldest and newest parts. While ancient structures like the amygdala respond to threats by trying to turn our anger or fear on, it's newer structures, such as the prefrontal cortex, the thinking part of our brain, that try to turn them off. It's the tug of war between these two systems that gives rise to our emotions. At New York University, neuroscientist Joseph Ledoux has studied how the amygdala and the cortex shape our emotional responses. You know more about the amygdala than anybody alive, and you still can't control yours.
No.
Why?
Now, there's an interesting thing, again, that has to do with the wiring of the brain. This is if we could just look at it here. So this is the human brain inside a skull. And the prefrontal cortex is here in the front, right behind your forehead. And that is the newest part of the brain. This is where we make our decisions, this is where we plan for the future and strategize. The lateral prefrontal cortex has no connectivity with the amygdala. The amygdala has superhighways to talk to the cortex, but the prefrontal cortex has only back roads and side streets to get to the amygdala. And therefore, it is unable to tell the amygdala, cool it.
But why are there no connections?
We're in the process of evolving as we speak, and those connections have not been put in yet. This thing was built to do fancy things cognitively, not necessarily to control our emotions.
The fact that we are not designed to have complete control over our emotions can have some unfortunate consequences.
I was in such a deep, dark place that I couldn't even really see myself. Like, I had become this, like, muddled thing of a person. I was so sad. I was so angry. I couldn't get beyond it. I realized I had to do something when I hit rock bottom. One of my friends invited me to a party, and I was having a great time, but because I'm a control freak, I decided that I wanted to change the song. I wanted to go over to the iPod and change the song. So the guy whose party it was came over to me and he's like, "What are you doing?" And boom, I just went off. I'm like, "Who are you?" And he was like, "It's my party, and I'm gonna play what I want." And I'm like, "You're a selfish and just slapped him across the face, and his glasses went flying across the room. And so at that moment, it was like everything sort of fell away, you know what I mean? Like, there were at least another 20, 30 people in the room, and I could see none of them. They just turned into like this blur, and all I could see was this guy. He grabbed a chunk of my hair and he hung on to it really tight. So I just started kicking him. I was just like laying on him, like, let go, let go, let go. I kept on saying, let go, let go. I just kept on kicking him, just kicking him and kicking him and kicking him until he finally let go. And at that point, I started crying. You know? And it was like everything became real again. And all the people were there and they were looking at me with such like shock and awe, and I felt horrible. That I did it. That's what hurts me. And that I shouldn't, you know, that it goes against my values, it goes against who I am, you know? That's what hurts me.
Think about what happens after an argument that was really intense. People feel terrible. Oftentimes they feel depressed afterwards. It's not a good long-term solution.
Anger is not a helpful emotion. It's not always an appropriate emotion. And in the cases in my own life when I've allowed it free range, I've allowed it action, I've always regretted it after. I can't think of a time when I've seen my own anger as something that was constructive for me or useful in the world.
But I've noticed where my anger comes out in subtle or not so subtle ways, and how it's wrought a lot of havoc in my personal life. So, including the anger that I've turned toward me.
Have I lost it to the point where I did feel like I've lost it? Yeah. It's not easy to feel like you made an ass out of yourself, perhaps, and get through that. But people do, I think people make mistakes every day of their life.
Can we outsmart our own brains? Can we learn to control our emotions? Stanford psychologist James Gross has spent his career studying what scientists call emotion regulation.
For me, emotion regulation is really the science of understanding how we can modify our emotions, harness their energy, so that we can direct them in ways that we wish to go. So for me, emotion regulation isn't turning down or turning off all emotions, because emotions, I think, are often incredibly helpful and are what make us who we are. But I think at times, it's great to have a set of tools that we can avail ourselves of so that we can change the course of the emotions that we're having.
To test his theory, Gross asked about 100 women to take part in an experiment. Each woman was wired up to a machine so that researchers could measure her heart rate, pulse, and perspiration. All physiological indicators of emotional arousal. First, the women were asked to recall a recent incident that had made them angry, and to think about the incident again and again. To keep turning it over in their minds, to consider and reconsider every detail. Scientists call this rumination. To Mary, this way of thinking came quite naturally.
I didn't understand why it was so easy for me to just go into these ranting raves and just become so obsessed on this thing. Okay, you forgot to call me. Why did you forget to call me? You should have called me. I don't understand. Okay, you were busy, but I reminded you several times. It's just, you become fixated on these things, and you don't take a moment to breathe.
In the next phase of the experiment, the women were again asked to think about the incident that made them angry. But this time, to try to visualize it as a neutral observer, or from the perspective of the other person. This is a technique that scientists call reappraisal. When the subjects ruminated, their cardiovascular system went into overdrive. When they reappraised, their bodies became calmer and their anger diminished.
One of the things that people for a very long time have repeated again and again is that actually there's an important role for thinking in emotions. And if you can change the way you think, you can change the way you feel.
Mary's introduction to emotion regulation came through a therapist who helped her explore the roots of her anger and suggested ways she could better control it.
One of the things that I've sort of grown to accept in the last couple of years, especially going to therapy, is that I have to stop myself and just take a breath, and then also think about the person in front of me, to really see them as someone who makes mistakes and maybe didn't say what they mean, or maybe had a rough day at work today. You're in the middle of an argument and you're so riled up and you're so ready to fight for something incredibly stupid that feels primordial. It's hard to think about the people around you and how it's affecting them.
Have you tried to put any of this into practice, like taking it out for a test drive, this advice?
Yeah.
Did it work?
It's hard work, but it works. You practice, it's like anything. It's like learning an instrument. You practice. And you learn some basic tools, and you always go back to those tools when all things fail.